Santa Rosa. Welcome to an edition of Cooking with Pooh. I'm Mrs. McMullen and we are going to be baking together today. So I'm so excited that you are in my kitchen. This is one of my favorite cookbooks. It is called the Pooh Cookbook. Pooh is one of my favorite little characters, and this is a cookbook that I kind of treasure because it was my grandma's and it's actually signed by the author. Cookbooks are fun too because this one has some stories and whatnot in it, so it's fun to actually read the stories about that. So we're going to put that aside because we're actually not using that today. We are going to be making salted oatmeal chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so I'm going to go through the whole recipe with you, show you how to make it, and then you'll get to see the end product and you'll just have to virtually taste those yummy cookies. So to begin with, I have my trusty mixer, but I need to turn on the oven. So first I'm going to turn on the oven to the correct temperature so that can get started while we make the cookies. This recipe calls for a half a cup of butter. So I'm going to put this in my mixer. The half a cup of butter is, does anybody know how many tablespoons are in a half a cup of butter? I think you should look that up. It's a lot of butter, actually, a half a cube or a whole cube of butter is a lot of butter. It also calls for 4 tablespoons of shortening. So we're going to put that in there. I already got that ready because it kind of sounds very loud. And we're going to mix that up till it gets nice and smooth. Now, as soon as the shortening and butter are mixed, we're going to add sugar. We're going to add white sugar and brown sugar. Does anybody know the difference between those two? We're adding a half a cup of each. First, I'm going to do white sugar. Might be something for you guys to look up. What is the difference between that white sugar and this brown sugar? And then I use light brown sugar in my cooking normally. If I use sauces or whatever, I'll use dark brown. But in my baking for cookies and such, I use light brown sugar. It also calls for 1 egg, but we're going to do that in just a minute. We're going to beat this till it's smooth. We want to make sure that the sugars are blended really well. So usually you blend between 2 and 3 minutes. And that way the batter is not like granulated. Like, you guys can look up that word. The sugar needs to be nice and fine. And we're going to add an egg. I happen to have a cute little brown egg. I don't know. Was this chicken a different kind of chicken that laid the brown egg? Or is it just like any other chicken and it happened to be brown? Another thing that you could look up this week. I think that would be very interesting to find out. Why a brown egg with a very tough shell compared to other eggs, like a white egg. And then I do a teaspoon of vanilla. And I'm sorry, folks, I never measure my vanilla. So I'm just going to squirt it in, and that is done. Voila. And we're going to mix that till it's smooth. All right, so now my wet ingredients are all ready to go, and I'm going to start adding my dry. Now, with the dry, we're going to add 2 cups of oats, and we're going to use old-fashioned oats, not quick oats. There's a difference. And again, something you guys can look up. But I'm using regular oats because I like that thick, oaty texture in my cookies. So we're adding 2 cups of this. And then the recipe calls for a cup of flour. I'm using all-purpose flour, which is a little hard to get these days, but I found some. So I've made this recipe before, and I'm pretty lenient with my measurement. So I don't sift it, not for this recipe, but I'm going to put in a cup. But then I've made this before, and I know that if I only put in a cup of flour, the cookies tend to flatten a little bit. I think it's because of the shortening, actually. So I usually put in a little bit extra, maybe 1/4 to 1/2 a cup, so that my cookies will have a better texture. Okay. So I'm going to move this over here so we can see what we're doing, because we're already finished with all of these items. Now, I have to add some teaspoons. Now, I have my teaspoon set. I also have a 1 tablespoon on here, but I use it for something else. So I have a teaspoon, a 1/2 teaspoon, and a 1/4 teaspoon. I also have an 1/8 of a teaspoon. Now, what this called for, and I already put it in here, it called for a teaspoon or a 1/4 of a teaspoon of cinnamon. So I put my 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon in here, but I was wondering if I didn't have a 1/4 and I only had an 1/8 of a teaspoon, how many teaspoons would I have to use to make a 1/4 with that 1/8 of a teaspoon? And then I did a teaspoon of baking soda and a 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon. All right, so I'm going to mix that in, put it in there. Now we're using salt, sea salt. It's very important to use sea salt during this recipe because the flavor of sea salt is much thicker. It's more granulated. You're going to sprinkle it on top of the cookies also. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this first. And while I do that, I'm going to prepare my cookie sheets. Now, most recipes do not call for parchment paper, but this one does because the cookies are really sticky, and if you don't use parchment paper, it's just really going to stick to your cookie sheets. So I have these handy dandy ones. I'm going to use these today because they're already pre-cut. I'm just going to line it, and then you don't have to do anything else. You can just put the cookies on the cookie sheet. So that'll be ready. Now, these cookies are called salted oatmeal cookies with dark chocolate. So I am going to use dark chocolate today. I prefer dark chocolate with nuts. I love dark chocolate with nuts. Semi-sweet, I also like with nuts. Milk chocolate can all go on its own because it's very sweet. So I'm supposed to be using 6 ounces of this. This bag is 12 ounces, so how much would I use? Right, I'm going to use half of it. Again, I don't measure. I'm not really a measuring type person for that, so we're going to see what it looks like. Oh, it's looking good. All right. One of the things that I didn't talk about before we got started is to have a clean work surface and also to wash your hands, which I did. And put your dogs out, which I did. They would like to be in here when I bake, but I don't like them in here when I bake. So, all mixed up. It looks just delicious. Now, should we taste the dough? Oh, no. Never taste the dough, right? The dough has what in it? It has raw egg. And raw egg can make you sick. I have a little secret to tell though. I've lived and I used to eat cookie dough. I try not to anymore, but I used to eat cookie dough every time. That's actually how I would taste my batter to see if it was ready. So I like to use a cookie scoop, but you could use a tablespoon, stick it on there. It doesn't really matter. I like using a cookie scoop because it's easy and I don't have to touch it. When you put it on a tablespoon or something, you kind of have to touch it. So I am just putting my cookies out on here. And the oven looks like it's almost ready, but we still have one more step before we're able to put these in the oven. So let's get these out. Let's see, I think it says that it's supposed to make 24 cookies. So how many cookies is that? And if you're in elementary or even middle school, even high school, would that be enough cookies to have given one to each person if I had 24? No. You can figure out how many batches of cookies of these cookies could I have made to feed enough for your class. Now, I will say that my cookies may not make 24. I tend to be a little heavy-handed on the cookie scoop, so I don't always get to the 24, but that's okay. Whatever's there is good, right? The little ones. All right. So now, these are salted. So what we need to do is I flatten it out a little bit. So I just go and I kind of boom, boom, flatten it with the cookie scoop, right? Just to make it easier to put the salt on, because we are going to sprinkle some of that sea salt onto the cookies. You know, I'm going to try this instead. It's getting kind of sticky. That doesn't work either. If you weren't watching, I might use my hands, but I'm not going to do that. I'm doing it the right way, right? Sometimes I use gloves if I make cookies for, let's say, a friend's wedding or something. then I'll wear cookies. I mean cookies, sorry. I'll wear gloves, just so it's a, cleaner environment. The recipe called for 2 teaspoons of salt, but I only put 1 teaspoon in the batter. So the other teaspoon of salt is going to go on top of the cookies. So we'll make them a little flatter here. If I had gloves on, I could probably do this much easier, but I don't, so. I forgot to tell you that I am wearing an apron that my husband made when he was in home ec. Yes, kids, there used to be home ec way back when. And he made this apron, I believe it was in 1977. So can anyone tell me how old this apron is? I wore it just in honor of him in home ec because he doesn't do any home ec now. So I'm going to take a little bit of the sea salt and I'm just going to sprinkle a little tiny bit. I don't really care to, if they all have the same amount. You just want to get a good amount on there because the flavor of the sea salt with the dark chocolate is just terrific. So, and I can't eat these because they're not gluten-free. I do make gluten-free cookies, but these are for a friend. So, and I did not use my whole teaspoon, which is fine. I think there's plenty of sea salt on there. My oven is ready, so I'm going to stick both sheets in. I actually have a convection oven, so this works really well. And I'm going to put it on for 12 minutes. And we wait for those delicious cookies to come out. All right, we'll see you in just a few minutes with the final product. While we're waiting for the cookies to bake, I'm going to read a little something from this cookbook. It's from the author, but it was a quotation from Winnie the Pooh. It says, Christopher Robin asked Pooh, "What do you like doing best in the world, Pooh?" "Well," said Pooh, "what I like best," and then he had to stop and think. When he had thought it all out, he said, "What I like best in the whole world is me and Piglet going to see you and you saying, 'What about a little something?' And me saying, 'Well, I shouldn't mind a little something. Should you, Piglet?' And it being a hummy sort of day outside and the birds singing." And the author said, "We hope it will be a hummy sort of day inside whenever you use the Pooh cookbook." Her name is Virginia Ellison. So for those of you that are gluten-free, I like this. I've made my own blend, which is really nice also, but sometimes I can't get all the different flours that you need to put the blend together. So I use Bob's all-purpose baking flour. I think it works really well. The only thing is I don't think it's a 1-to-1 ratio. I think you have to use a little bit more of this to make the cookie turn out the same. And then those of you that are vegan, I use an egg replacer. I do make vegan cookies. And we use these mini chocolate chips. Sorry to open, so dairy-free, which is really good. My kids love them. In fact, they just eat them instead of me putting them in the cookies. But if you want to make, like even this recipe, it would have been easy to swap out these chips and these chocolate chips and then this flour. Again, I would have used a little bit more flour with this recipe. Welcome back, Santa Rosa. The cookies are about done, so I'm going to be taking them out of the oven and we'll be able to look at them and see how delicious they look. You have to be careful when you take something out of the oven. You don't want to eat them right away because you will burn yourself. So I am going to pull them out. There we go. Actually, I can go a little closer. Look at that. And you probably can't see it, but they're all a little glistening on top because of the sea salt. So there you have it. And I made, how many did I make? My cookie recipe only made 18, the way I made the cookies, instead of 2 dozen. So how many cookies did I not make according to the recipe? Another thing for you guys to figure out. So I hope you had fun today. I hope you join me again, Cooking with Pooh. And until next time, Santa Rosa, be safe. Bye.